Music Theory 4 class. Go ahead and get started with our first actual instructional video besides the Blackboard video I already posted. I'm going to start in on chapter 26. We're going to kind of take a turn away from what we've been doing, and that's tonal harmony. Harmony that uses tertian chords or tertian chord structures, and it kind of has these dictates of tonic pitch, of using major and minor scales, of using very specific rules for harmonic progression, for part writing. We're going to take a complete turn away from that. And really at the beginning of the 20th century, we're seeing big changes in how composers were approaching music, the types of scales they used, the types of chords that they used. By the end of the 19th century, chromaticism had become as you can see here in the textbook, it had become ultrachromaticism to the point that we weren't seeing the same sorts of music that we had seen at the dawn of the 19th century. Of course, things like Impressionism and jazz and eventually the Second Viennese School, which was really post-tonal and dodecaphonic music, and then serialism, and then more experimental music and avant-garde music emerge really sort of from the 20th century through mid-20th century and on into the 21st century. So I'll let you read a little bit of this introduction. I won't go over it too much for the sake of brevity. Impressionism was a music period that I don't think that Debussy or Ravel, they didn't really like the title or the label of Impressionism. Impressionism came from a genre of art that was happening around the same time, and many people kind of thought that the music that Debussy and Ravel were composing were evocative of this art that was being made during that time. A lot about soundscapes, a lot about not having progression, right? Progression is this idea of musical goal. And Impressionism, in some ways, we're getting rid of that, where we have static blocks of harmony and we're really experimenting with sound and with color, as opposed to always having this aim or this goal that we have in a lot of tonal harmony or traditional pieces of traditional works that we study. So let me give you a little bit of an example. This is a really famous example of Debussy, but I don't know that it embodies the idea of Impressionism or the idea that Debussy was really pushing the bounds. Very nice music. It's kind of floating, and this is one of his preludes called "Girl with the Flaxen Hair," and I think he's trying to get this pentatonic sound, which we'll talk about later, that sort of calls to mind a girl from Ireland or the girl from the United Kingdom or from that area of the world. Let's move forward here. The point of this chapter was to really talk about scale materials, and the first thing we're going to talk about is diatonic modes, or what we might call church modes. Actually used somewhat in the Renaissance period or in the medieval period, used in chant. These modes were often, especially particular modes were used in certain types of chant or to evoke a certain type of mood. Here, the 20th century or the 19th, 20th century composers are using them in sort of a neo-modal way. They're revisiting them. They're using them to do different things, different experiments with them. So let's talk about the diatonic modes. We know the major scale, or C major, and the minor scale. It's relative minor, A minor. Those are the scales we've primarily used in tonal harmony because of their relation and because of the chords that they produce. So now I want you to imagine C major. This particular scale, this set of notes, has 7 different permutations. The first is where we start on C, major scale, or what we'll call Ionian. So now what if we started on the second scale degree of C major? We get number 2 here, or Dorian. Now we're going to start on the third scale degree. A new scale, Phrygian. Fourth scale degree, Lydian. 5, fifth scale degree, Mixolydian. 6th scale degree, or Aeolian, also known as the minor scale, or the relative minor of our original C. And finally, Locrian. So by using all of the different scale degrees of a major scale, or starting them on them, or using them as our tonic pitch or our central pitch, we can create 7 different scales. These are what we know as the diatonic modes, right? Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and Locrian. So really what we're saying is if we start on D and we use essentially the key signature of C major, no sharps, no flats, we get a Dorian scale. Now this can be done in any key, really. So think about the key of A major, which has 3 sharps. If we start on the second scale degree of A, or if we start on B, and we use the key of A major, we create a B Dorian scale. So inside every major key or major scale, there's the possibility of 7 possible modes, or 7 possible permutations of that original major scale. Those are Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, and Aeolian, and Locrian, if I can say it. Now there's another way to get to these scales, and I'll talk about that just a little bit later in the chapter. So the book says here that 7 modes can be transposed to any 12 major keys, and we'll talk about how you can do that a little farther down the line here. It's important to note that we can think about the modes in a few different ways. So let me give you an example of that. So let's say we wanted to figure out how we could design the scale. Let's say design the scale F Phrygian. We know that Phrygian is mode 3, or would start on the 3rd scale degree of any major scale. So if we want to create F Phrygian, we would want to think about F, and what is F the 3rd scale degree of, or what key is F the 3rd scale degree of? And if we think about that, we would say, F is the 3rd scale degree of D flat major. And so if we use the key of D flat major, starting on F, we can create a Phrygian scale. So we can think about it in terms of scale degree, or each of the modes being associated with a particular scale degree. And then we can use whatever key that scale degree is associated with to figure out how to design the scale, or how to make the scale. That's certainly one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is that we can think about what notes we have to adjust, or flat, or sharp from any major key, any major scale, in order to make our modes. And we'll talk about that just a little bit later. Okay, so let's talk about what these different modes sound like in relation to maybe a major or minor scale. So let's look over here, C Ionian, major scale. And really, when I say Ionian, really we're talking about the major scale. Let's talk about C Mixolydian. Also sounds very much like a major scale, except for we have a flat 7. So the main characteristics of the major scale are that major 3rd and that perfect 5th, right? So this combination kind of making that major triad there. So it sounds major, except for that little bluesy note at the end, that flat 7. C Lydian also resembles that major scale, again, because we have mi and so in there, that major third, that perfect 5th. But here, we've adjusted our major scale to become Lydian by raising our 4th scale degree from F sharp from F to F sharp, rather. So Ionian, Mixolydian, and Lydian all kind of sound like major keys, right? Except for Mixolydian and Lydian have some slight adjustments, flat 7 and then sharp 4. Aeolian, over here on the right, otherwise known as our natural minor scale, starting on A here. And Aeolian is associated with the 6th scale degree. A Dorian also sounds like a minor mode, except for as compared to our natural minor, it has a raised 6. Kind of gives it that really nice sound there with that whole step between E and F sharp instead of being between E and or a half step being between E and F. Phrygian also kind of resembles a minor scale, except for we have that half step right at the beginning, which gives it a crunch, but we still have that minor third in there, which makes it sound like a minor scale. So Phrygian scale is really a natural minor scale, but with a lowered 2nd scale degree. And finally, Locrian is like a natural minor, but with a lowered 2nd and 5th scale degree. This doesn't really sound like a natural minor because we lose that perfect 5th. It becomes a diminished 5th. So it kind of just sounds a little diminished in nature. So there's kind of your relations. The more major sounding modes are Ionian, Mixolydian, and Lydian, and the more minor sounding modes are Aeolian, of course, Dorian, Phrygian, and a little bit Locrian, although Locrian's kind of a little bit of an outcast in this collection. Okay, here's another way of looking at the modes. And this is kind of talking about brightness to kind of more dissonance. And I think this is their way of showing that. But I wanted to show you this because I think it's another way to look at the modes. Notice that all of these modes, they're all 7 of the modes, but they're all starting on C. Yes? So let me play Ionian first. If we want to reference all of our modes from, say, a major scale, so let's say we had another major scale, let's say we had F major, and we wanted to get from F major to, let's say, F Mixolydian. How do we do that? Well, this is a nice chart in which to show you. In order to get to Mixolydian mode, we simply have to flat the 7 of any major scale. So here's our Ionian. If we want to make it Mixolydian, flat 7. If we want to make it Lydian, sharp 4. If we want to make a major scale into a Dorian mode, or Ionian into Dorian, or let's say a major scale into Dorian, we need to flat 3 and flat 7. If we want to make something Aeolian from a major scale, we want to flat 3, 6, and 7. Just like we know adding 3 flats to any major key will turn it into its parallel minor or into its Aeolian mode. If we want to make a major scale Phrygian, we flat 2, 3, 6, and 7, or add 4 flats. And finally, if we want to make a major scale into a Locrian scale, if we wanted to make a C major into Locrian, C Locrian scale, we would need to add 5 flats. Flat 2, 3, 5, 6, and 7. So if you're having a hard time thinking about how each of these, how to get to a particular mode by figuring out what scale degree that would be in a particular key and then using that, that key signature then to figure out what that scale would look like. This is a little bit of an easier way by just using a formula. So we start at the major scale. If we want it to be Mixolydian, we flat 7. If we want it to be Lydian, we sharp 4, or we add a sharp. If we want it to be Dorian, we add 2 flats, 3 and 7. If we want it to be Aeolian, we add 3 flats. We flat 3, 6, and 7. If we want it to be Phrygian, we add 4 flats. We flat 2, 3, 6, and 7. And finally, if we want it to be Locrian, we add 5 flats. Flat 2, 3, 5, 6, and 7. So that's another way of looking at it. And you can always start from the same place. You can always start from the major scale, as opposed to having to figure out what scale degree that mode belongs to, and then figure out how that note would fit in whatever particular scale it would fit in, and then use that key signature. So just another way to think about these modes. Okay, so let's talk about pentatonic scales. Pentatonic scales are cool scales. I don't know why this is not getting larger here. I will zoom in. I guess I won't zoom in. Well, you'll have to take a look in your book. Pentatonic scales are just as they're described. Penta means 5. These scales only have 5 notes. Another very important trait of these scales is they lack half steps. So let's think about our major scale. We have a half step between mi and fa, and we have a half step between ti and do. We're going to get rid of fa, and we're going to get rid of ti, and all of a sudden we have a pentatonic scale. This is a really nice scale. A lot of jazz musicians use this because when you play it, there are no wrong notes, no wrong melodies, no wrong chords. A lot of instruments use this scale as their base in more Eastern music. A lot of Eastern music has, a lot of world music actually, I should say, even more African-based music, uses a lot of pentatonic scales because they can be used in drones, they can be used to improvise freely. Melodic lines aren't hindered by half steps. So pentatonic scale is free of half steps. It only has 5 notes, so less notes to worry about too or control. So a really nice scale. The minor pentatonic has a slight adjustment to it, and I'll talk a little bit about this later. Basically, the minor pentatonic does the same thing. You can see a minor scale here has half steps between re and me, and between so and le. So we're going to get rid of re, and we're going to get rid of le. And the resulting scale is this. Now you'll notice if you start on E flat, that E flat actually represents the relative major pentatonic of our C minor pentatonic, right? So with pentatonic scales, we can't necessarily rely on scale degrees to get us there. We can't say, oh, it's always 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, because minor pentatonic actually uses 1, 3, 4, 5, 7, and 1 from the natural minor, so a little different. Now the Hiroyoshi scale is what we want our minor pentatonic scale to be, right? It's using 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, and then 1 here. The alternating pattern is whole step, half step, and then a minor third, and then half step, and then, a major third, and then a half step, and then a major third. And you can see the numbers written there below there are telling you the number of half steps between each. Hiroyoshi scale, of course, that has Japanese origins. This might be a little bit of an easier way to remember your pentatonic scales. I don't know why this is not enlarging, but we'll go with it. Our pentatonic scales, like our major scale, has some different possible modes to it, but they're not named like our major modes are. Right, so let's imagine our C major pentatonic. We've eliminated our half steps. Now, what if we took that major pentatonic scale, instead of starting on C, we now started on D? And then again, start on E. G, and finally A. Right, so 5 possible modes. You won't really have to worry about these modes. Really just want to worry about getting that original pentatonic scale that we can derive from a major scale by just eliminating our half steps, or by eliminating scale degree 4 and 7, or Fa and T. The other modes are not so important, but I would like to point out to you mode 5 is a minor pentatonic scale. So notice the relative major of C is A here, and A is, this is how we build our minor pentatonic scale. So there's 2 ways to get your minor pentatonic scale. You can take out those at scale degree 2 and scale degree 6 in a natural minor scale, or you can take your major pentatonic scale and start on whatever that 6th scale degree, or that whatever the relative minor key would start on here, and that's usually scale degree 6 in our major scale, or in this case A. So 2 ways to get to the minor pentatonic scale. All right, let me play you a piece that has some pentatonic scales in it. And really the pentatonic scales are in this middle melodic line you can hear here. This is an F sharp pentatonic scale here. You'll see F sharp, G, A sharp, C, D sharp, F sharp, there. And this is all black keys on the piano, so it's kind of a fun thing to play. And you can see the color changes a little bit here when we have a D sharp down here. But you could probably hear the pentatonic scale right in the middle. Again, no half steps there. It's an F sharp pentatonic scale. We're kind of revolving around that F sharp. You see we start there and we end there. And that's kind of how we can tell why that's the central pitch. All right, so really those are our main diatonic scales, or scales derived from our diatonic modes, or our diatonic our diatonic keys. Sorry, I couldn't think of a better way to put that. So again, we have diatonic modes. So those are the 7 modes we talked about, all based on the 7 different scale degrees of a major scale, or the pentatonic scales, which really is a major scale without any half steps, which results in just 5 pitches. And then you can move from there to the minor pentatonic, and of course all the different modes of the pentatonic, the 5 different modes of the pentatonic scale. Let's talk about the synthetic scales. And synthetic scales are built not through any sort of diatonic means, but rather through a pattern of different whole steps or half steps. There's 3 types we're going to be talking about, and first is the whole tone scale. One of Debussy's favorite scales, one of Bartók's favorite scales. And it's called the whole tone scale because it's made up all of all whole steps. Whole step, whole step, whole step. It has no tendency tones. It kind of floats. Kind of gives you that floaty, spacey feeling, yes? So whole tone scale is just that. You can start on any note you want, and it really doesn't matter how it's written. It can be written with sharps or with flats. You could have written the scale with a G flat, an A flat, and a B flat. It really doesn't matter. Really, what matters most is that all of the pitches are a whole step apart in the scale. Interestingly, the whole tone scale is really built on this idea of 2 augmented triads that are juxtaposed, that are put right next to each other. So if you look here, we have a C, an E, and a G sharp. And right next to it, we have a D an F sharp, and an A sharp. So these two chords stacked on top of each other make a whole tone scale. So really it's derived from augmented triads. The octatonic scale has 8 pitches in it. That's why it's called the octatonic scale. And it is built by alternating half steps and whole steps. Here's the scale. It's a very gritty, dissonant sounding scale. The octatonic scale really is 2 diminished 7th chords, and you can see with the brackets here in your text, stacked right next to each other. And if I play those 2 fully diminished 7 chords in succession, I get my octatonic scale. Finally, the hexatonic scale is an alternation of a half step and a minor third, or 3 half steps. That minor third sounds more like an augmented second when you play it right after the half step. Hexatonic scale, really, hexa is 6 and has 6 scale degrees. Excuse me. I'll let you listen to this Debussy excerpt, but this has, I believe, the whole tone scale as sort of its main feature. Actually, I'll play the bass line for you, and you can kind of hear the whole tone chords that are hanging out in here. You can hear all of those chords are built using the whole tone scale. So all of the notes that are used in the chords are derived from a whole tone scale. So I'll let you listen to that example. One more thing to note. Some of our diatonic modes can be combined. Notably, the Lydian Mixolydian, and if you'll remember, Lydian is sharp 4 and Mixolydian is flat 7. We can combine this to become a Lydian Mixolydian scale. And here's the sound. Kind of interesting sounding scale. And this has several different modes too, and they kind of go into that. I believe there's also a Phrygian-Dorian or Dorian-Phrygian combination we might be able to have as well, which kind of sounds like this. Oh, excuse me. So we can combine different modes as well. All right, so take some time to look at the self-test, and I'm going to post some more analyses and exercises from your self-test, just kind of show you how to build these scales. But that's all for now. Thanks.